30 years ago, the internet was developed. 241 years ago, the Declaration of Independence was signed here in the United States in Philadelphia. 11,500 years ago, we started cultivating food instead of merely hunting and gathering as a species. 50,000 years ago, several waves of people started to migrate out of Africa, venturing into unknown places. 200,000 years ago, our ancestors began to exhibit evidence of behavioral modernity. 4.5 billion years ago, this blue planet that we call home was born. And as we can calculate it today, 13.8 billion years ago is when we believe this amazing universe that we're a part of was started. It's been a long time coming to get to this very moment, and everything that's ever happened throughout all of time, and perhaps the multiverses of life that occurred before the universe that we're living in, all of that has led up to this moment, right here, right now. And there's this great opportunity for us to understand the interconnectedness that we have with all of life, not just today, the people that we're here together with, the species we inhabit this planet with, but actually our interconnectedness throughout time. There is so much uniqueness and complexity to our life. And throughout all of time, things had to happen exactly as they did for us to be here as we are. And it's pretty profound. And I think it's very empowering for us to think about how important it is for us right here, right now, to be considering what it is that we want to become. What it is we want to become individually, collectively, as people, and how we want to help move things along into the best possible becoming. And so that's what tonight's about. It's just a really fun exploration of that through many different facets. So I invite you to participate, to laugh, to engage, and to have a wonderful evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Hi. My name is Lauren Hulbert. I'm going to play some original songs tonight for you. And I chose the ones that I felt best suited the theme, what are we becoming? So this first one is called Beneath the Soil. Mama, she told me I could be, long as I held on tight to my dream, I could be anything. Papa, you told me I could do, long as I pushed on through, I could do anything. I've been wandering around this town. It's often quite the challenge to stay grounded.
I'm Bidisha, and I want to thank both Anders and Courtney, who will speak later, because they inspire us to reinvent the good life as a generation. And that requires even better cooperation across differences, including between those of us here today. So I look forward to meeting some of you later on. You can work more effectively with others if you know how to access yourself and your connection to spirit and landscape more fully. The practice I'm going to guide you through can help with that. We all have differences, but I'm sure of one thing. We all have nervous systems. And those nervous systems need careful attention and tending, but it's surprisingly easy to forget that in our day-to-day lives. And our breath regulates our ability to choose whether to fight, flight, freeze, appease, or dissociate, especially under pressure, instead of reflexively following our first reaction. And that makes a huge difference to taking a stand for what we care about, to keeping an open, fearless heart in this time of turbulence and conflict. So in that sense, our breath is the seat of our character. It's one key to entering into conflict in a generative way so that new possibilities can emerge for what we want to become in ways that weren't even visible before. It makes it possible to come home to yourself. So I'm going to take you through a 10-minute breath-focused centering practice. Some of the language is drawn from a modern tradition, but one reason I like this practice is because centering is common across many wisdom traditions. You can associate it with a similar practice from any tradition you're in if it feels right. And you're most welcome to participate or not participate at whatever level feels comfortable. You're invited to, I guess you guys are mostly all sitting, but to stand if that feels more comfortable, to keep your eyes closed or open. And I thank my teachers and invite you to thank yours. First, I want to invite you to sense into where there's tension in your body and really release it. You could tense up all your muscles and then release them quickly. Tense and release. You could massage the tissues of your face, your neck, your shoulders, rolling your shoulders back and forth, and touching or tapping the tense parts of your body if that feels comfortable. Just relaxing your whole body. Then I'm going to invite you to center in your length, your dignity. Feeling your attention nestle into yourself like a pebble dropping into a well, sensing your heart. Really drawing energy from the ground beneath your feet and the skies up above. Continuing to source our energy all the way up from the ground. Feeling our breath in our toes. Flexing and releasing our toes. Breathing slowly and regularly. Feeling the natural rise and fall of breath. First in our feet and ankles, then in our knees, our thighs, our hips, our pelvis, lower back, rib cage, middle back, upper back. Just feeling the breath massaging the organs and tissues, back of the neck, back of the head, and around to the shoulders, then the collarbone. Then out to the upper arms, elbows, lower arms, backs of hands, then fingers, and slowly back up the arms to the shoulders. Then up through the front of the neck, chin, sides of face, cheeks, nostrils, bridge of the nose, eyes, forehead, temples, top of the head. Imagine a straight line from the very top of your head through your body and down to the perineum. Center along this line, feeling your length. Then centering in your width, your space of connection. Paying attention to temperature, pressure, sensation. Really feeling your back. Sensing the teachers and loved ones who have supported you at your back. Sending the breath to your heart. And if you feel comfortable, open your palm to invite touch from the people sitting next to you. And if you don't feel comfortable touching or being touched right now, bring your hands to the center of your body in whatever pose you feel most comfortable in. And then center in your core, really sending the breath all the way to your core. And if thoughts come up, note them and let them go. Centering in your purpose. Why are you here? What do you stand for? What are you here to co-create in this moment? Who do you want to become? Continuing to breathe deeply. Attend to images, sensations, colors that may be coming up for you. Welcome in openness to and curiosity about the new. And then slowly rub your hands together, touch them to your eyes. And then open your eyes.
I'd like to welcome up a great artist to share his heart with us. So I invite you to center your heart so we can listen to the good words that we'll be sharing.
For those of you who have not heard me before, I've had the privilege of being at Middle Circle a number of times. My name is Joel Brown. I'm a spoken word poet. Some people may not know what spoken word is, and what I say to people most times is, if you think about jazz, and you think about big band jazz, which is what they had in the 20s and 30s, then you think about fusion, which had a little more funk and flavor. Spoken word is like that fusion. Spoken word poets and artists I like to think of as truth tellers, and I can't think of a better time in the country and in the world right now than to have more truth tellers. So I don't believe in previewing art. You will get from it what you're supposed to get from it. I'm going to go through a brief centering meditation, which is what I always do, and then we're going to get into it. If you find yourself being moved, don't be shy. You can snap your fingers and whatnot. You can do any sorts of things. Just don't rush the stage. But spoken word is meant to be an engaging art form. So let's get to it. I am the son of Lawrence and Jewel. I am the beloved of Anton. I am the brother to Regina and Damon and Kim and Kylan. I am the son of ancestors. I am a friend to the Seven Directions. I am a brother to humanity. November 8th, 2016. You all saw it. Scared my friends, scared my family, scared myself. Because I didn't know what to do. Usually I'm the one offering solace and advice and peaceful words in a den of chaos. But no, not on that night. I watched the world change in an instant, or did it? My cousin, one of those hard, lion-hearted young men who had never voted before, asked me as the innocence was leaving his body, "Cuz, what does this mean?" And I had nothing to give him. Nothing philosophical, nothing poetic, nothing remotely rational. All I could share with him was my rage. It took me 3 months to come down, almost a month to recognize the sound of my own thoughts running from one side of my emotions to the next. Vexed was I with resentment, anger, and sadness. Shook I was with this sheer craven madness. A demagogue had become the face of this nation. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, a beautiful land with searing contradictions. All the talk of hope and change, love and progress, universal health care was gone. Erase, kill, delete. Then I had to answer calls, texts, and tweets from homies all over the place, from friends in Mexico, Chile, and Argentina saying, "But you said he couldn't win." My friends in Finland and Russia and France, the stance in Kenya was, "Bro, what's going on?" My man said to me, "Baby, Americans are the only ones who tell each other that the lies won't come for you when those lies are sitting in your kitchen every day drinking coffee." In this alternate and twisted reality, I didn't know what to do. I cried 4 days straight, didn't meditate, barely ate, and couldn't really contemplate, thought it was a ruse. Avoided the news. I was a walking zombie and feeling like Huey Newton, but I could also hear what the people were doing, and at some point, I started to feel blood in my extremities, enough to truly feel the pain that had flooded me, the political winds that had gutted me. No longer feeling like a prisoner, but certainly feeling like a man with no country. Conversations were had in many circles. Facebook debates, sensational news, and posturing commentators pretending to fight. People acting like you're not an American unless you grew up in some hard-scrabble town with one stoplight. Talks of collusion, political confusion. I got burnt out on his orange image and civil rights legacies being destroyed and pillaged. But what shocked me most were the anecdotes, the colorful academic retorts. "This is insane. We've never seen this before. Can you believe his sexism, his continued misogynistic attacks? His incessant war against journalists or his prejudice against hardcore facts?" But as I watched the apathy start to rot, I had to ask my brothers and sisters, do I need to remind you of what you forgot? Did you forget when Reagan propped up Hussein? When he feigned ignorance about AIDS? When he supported dictators like Noriega and Marcos and had $200 million budget deficits? When 138 members of his administration were investigated or jailed or indicted? When Nelson Mandela was the only thing out of South Africa that he or Margaret Thatcher chided? Did you forget when he said that money would trickle down from the rich and make its way to the poor like manna from the sky? You forgot too that he was giving you fake news and telling you bold-faced lies. Did you forget that Kennedy largely shunned King? Where were you when Bush Sr. called black women welfare queens? Where were you when black men were given harsher sentences for crack? Where are you when Justice Thomas writes his opinions like he's apologizing for being black? Did you forget that Obama was the deporter-in-chief? What's the line between rhetoric and action and belief? Did you forget about George W., who made up stories about WMDs? Did you forget about when there was torture at Abu Ghraib or with Abu Ghraib detainees? Where were you when Katrina flooded New Orleans and Canadian soldiers were the first ones the ones who got there first? Where were you when the 2008 recession got worse and worse? Where were you when Clinton violated his marriage multiple times, but then blocked gay rights and told gay and lesbian couples to get to the back of the line? Where were you when he deregulated Wall Street and ran amok? Where were you when he looked Rwanda squarely in the eyes and said, "We don't give a you-know-what"? I'm not trying to draw a false equivalency, but in this country we have a tendency to talk about white and male supremacy as though it's new. But if you are a person of color, a woman or a mother, working class, or just busting your ass, a human with some dignity and some ambition, a person not feeling this two-party political rendition is not new. If you need a reminder, talk to Trayvon, talk to Murley Evers, talk to the birthers who thought Obama was a Muslim, as though Christians can't be radical. Hell, look what's happening in San Francisco to boot. The population of San Francisco is so small that we have our own Facebook group. Yes, it bothers me that the president is sexually predacious, but only now do we pretend that sexual harassment is really outrageous. Bill O'Reilly, Bill Clinton, Bill Cosby, other men whose names are not Bill, countless women who had no voice and had to swallow the pill. So I will shout that he is not my president. I will persist to resist, but each day I feel like I'm losing my breath. Each week I feel like I'm in some distant reality. We call ourselves the resistance like we're in a science fiction flick. Who votes for Bernie and then bucks the system when 45 is the other pick? And yet, more white women voted for the misogynist than the woman who simply had too much ambition. Washington has become simply a war of attrition, a war to build a wall to block people who are not even trying to come here. These things are not new, but why are some of us just starting to hear? These things are not preordained or planned. Spiritualists and free thinkers, where do we go? How do we stand? Back and forth the pendulum swings. Each new day will bring a reactionary sense of self-righteousness, a march, a protest, a pithy social media post, a boast that we won some argument in a public media forum, a loss of social decorum, while the emperor with no clothes stands at Liberty University today and tells us once again that he won the Electoral College. But all of it is an illusion. We just need to stop being titillated with the idea of confusion, the idea that we have no power, the joke that this is a surprise, the feeling that this is an accident, some random event across universal time. We need to see who or what we want to be. I need for us to act with some intention. I need for us to make a decision, whether we just want to tear the house down or build up humanity. See, I don't have much progressiveness left. It's being squeezed out of me. Because progression from our base instincts is not really progress at all. I thought we were supposed to be long past the point of simply walking upright and not being Neanderthals. I can't take any more, but I want more. But I can't take gay men being tortured and battered in Chechnya. I can't take people being battered, media personalities talking about things that don't matter. Police chalk around another black teenager, remorseful cops saying they mistook his color for danger. People being surprised when 45 lies, icebergs melting and rising tides. Kids with no food, dictator leadership being praised for being cool. Men making health decisions for women, dissenters being treated as villains, tax cuts to the rich, the predictable partisan pitch, lobbyists making it rain, citizens getting shade, no legislation being passed, refugees being slaughtered and gassed. Students being tested without mercy, government representation without any diversity, young people being ignored because they don't vote, addicts penalized because they smoke crack and not coke, immigrant hating, conservatives baiting poor people to vote against their interests, politicians counting their riches, progressives scared of power, spiritualists talking about oneness and downplaying difference, but then seeing social justice and being indifferent, Americans wishing for the 50s, civil rights icons still living off the 60s, nationalism and hot compassion, blue hot anger with no action, rationalization disguised as truth, passing down capitulation to our youth, U.S. foreign policy that uses violence as the instigator, and foreigners who act like the U.S. was the originator. When all the reality begins with every last part of me and every last one of you. See, I've lived at least a dozen lives, and each one of them has had its own version of November 8th. When people do double takes when I walk in the C-suite, when politicians discuss my life like I'm an avatar or a cartoon, when I'm presumed to be something other than I am. See, brothers and sisters and haters and friends, what we are becoming is part of what we've always been. And it goes beyond Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, Theresa May, and Marie Le Pen. The course is not predetermined. We must act with some wisdom and some haste. I hope we start to chart a new course, because a beautiful world is a terrible thing to waste.
This song is just about setting yourself free to follow your dream. It's called Free to Dream. Stretching out before me, I'll do what I choose. So afraid to walk, I'm alone, so afraid to lose. But I'm finding every path leads me right back to the same place. My angels say, ain't got no time to live someone else's life. You got a right to give it a try. We'll be right beside if you fall. If you fall, we'll catch you. If you when you're feeling alone, we're right beside you. Those voices in your head, tide, set it free into the night. If you see it, if you believe it, if you're surrounded you with all that you do, if you cannot ignore it, don't be scared of something new. So darling, have a little faith, go and live your truth. It might be better than you ever knew. Thank you.
I think we're all gonna be driving home like, you see it, believe it. That's a very cool song. Allow me to introduce to you my friend Courtney Martin. Can I brag about you just for a second?
Very, very, very briefly.
Okay.
My father is here, actually, so he can
Maybe you should give
pontificate
the
in
introduction.
very hyperbolic terms about who I am, if anyone needs to hear it.
I think that all of us maybe have our TED Talk in our back pocket that we all wish that we could go and share with the world. Well, Courtney's had a chance to do a couple of those, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
She is, TED.
Thank you.
She is also part of a wonderful project called On Being by Krista Tippett. And she is the columnist, one of several columnists for On Being, and has a weekly column. And if you haven't checked that out, I would encourage you to do so. It's an opportunity for Courtney to continue to share really relevant things with people just like us. And in addition, she's become quite well known as a feminist. And I thought just to get it out, because I'm sure we've all been wondering, what is it like now to have Mr. O'Reilly be kind of out in the news? And I don't know if you know, but Courtney was actually on that show at one point. And I thought real quick, if you could just tell us, like, that's, I think, stirred up a whole bunch of stuff and became big in the news, and what that's been like for you. And how does that play a role perhaps in this American dream that we're talking about?
Wow. I don't know if I can make that connection with half of this beer already drunk, but I will start with the O'Reilly story briefly, which is just that I did quite a bit of television stuff in kind of my mid to late 20s. I'm 37 now, and I was living in New York, and I was writing for this feminist blog called Feministing, and Bill O'Reilly had called Helen Thomas, who was this incredible veteran White House correspondent, the Wicked Witch of the West. And I was brought in by sort of my feminist mentors to debate Bill O'Reilly, because they thought it would be great to have a younger woman arguing that, you know, ageism and sexism combined was what was going on. And so I did the show, and it was a really discomforting experience. I mean, I had done Fox a few times by then already, and probably most disconcerting was that every time I had done conservative television, they'd set it up as like a big joke. Like before it went live, people would be like, let's have fun, you know, and I'd be like, this is actually real to me. I believe strongly in the things I'm talking about. So it was just so clear that it was this form of entertainment as opposed to about real people's lives and real values. And when I debated Bill O'Reilly and I sat down, he came in, sat down, and said to me, do you even know why you're here? Which I just thought was like, wow. It was a totally bizarre thing, because you do, you know, a lot of pre-interviewing for those kinds of shows. Like, people know why they're there. You don't just like wander in off the street. Yeah. And then also, like, why was he trying to intimidate this like 27-year-old woman? You know, like, it's a very interesting thing. And I held my own.
You did, I saw it.
Yeah, I held my own, and thank you. And most importantly, his like big point was that, you know, if I would defend Sarah Palin's right to be judged based on her ideas, not on her appearance, then he would apologize to me on the next day's show. Well, it turned out I had written a whole article at Feministing, arguing that he himself was demeaning Sarah Palin because he made some comment on The View when he was on The View saying, like, I want Sarah Palin on my show, like, I'll help her pick out her wardrobe. And so he did have to apologize to me the next day and did this, like, totally ridiculous apology. But the most important thing was that as the show was airing, my inbox just kind of filled with, like, the most vitriolic, misogynist, hateful stuff. And this was kind of before Twitter and sort of the social media version of this, which is obviously even worse. I mean, these people had to actually find my email address. And so that to me was so fascinating that, like, beyond him, he was empowering. And interestingly, on Being this week, Krista interviewed Glenn Beck. I don't know if anyone's listened to that. But, you know, it's a whole nother layer of kind of, I think some of these figures, I mean, in Glenn Beck's case, doing his own soul searching about his role in igniting some of that hatred. In Bill O'Reilly's case, I don't think he's doing a lot of soul searching, who knows, but,
well, I feel like we, and I'm only speaking for myself, but I know a lot of the folks in here, but I feel like there was a sense of a trajectory of perhaps shared power, or the idea of power being shared among people was really kind of taking hold and was moving somewhere. And the election, I think for some of us, felt very awakening in that perhaps we hadn't moved as far along in the shared power space as we had thought, and that there was still a big sense of power over kind of still remaining. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about kind of what it's been like after writing your book. And Courtney just wrote a really great book. It's full of all of my bookmarks here, called The New Better Off, and I encourage everybody to check it out. But it was published before the election outcome.
right.
So it had already been written. And I don't know about everybody here, but at least for me, there was definitely a lot of heartache and wondering kind of like about if this way of living into the world is doing anything. Mm-hmm. And it was invite you to kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so like you said, I reported and wrote this book for like 2 years leading up to the election. It came out in September of last year. And the main thesis of the book is basically that the American dream, as we've known it, is dead, and that we have to reimagine it. And not only do we need to reimagine it, but that we already are. People are already rebuilding the American dream, and we're not acknowledging that. I'm a journalist, so you know, part of my job is to shine a light on what's really happening in the world, and my belief is that the media is missing this story, that you don't hear a lot about the ways in which people are reinventing the American dream. And so the book was an attempt to both sort of imagine that, to kind of lean into what is the future of the American dream, but also to document what I am seeing and experiencing of people already doing that. And so in a sense, the election doesn't change anything, because it's like, yeah, people still aren't telling the story about how people are reinventing the American dream. But in a sense, the election also, for me, felt like even more galvanizing, and put sort of fire under my ass to be like, no, I want to go everywhere and say this dream is dead. And if it ever existed, it was morally corrupt in the first place. The people who had access to this dream were white and privileged, and it was based on all kinds of, you know, policies. And so the sooner that we will admit, A, that it's dead, and B, that it was morally corrupt in the first place, the sooner, then that sounds very sad, but for me, that's very hopeful, because it means we can move the F on and say, okay, now what is the dream we all actually want to create? What are the systems and policies and structures we need? And what does that mean about our daily decisions, about like what job you take, what kind of family you have, where you live, how you think about success? So I feel more galvanized than ever for us to be honest about that.
I'm with you. Although I think that there's a sense of challenge that comes with that, because I have the unique opportunity to know a lot of the people in this room, and I know like where our hearts are.
Right.
And in part, that's one of the reasons why we showed up tonight. And I think that there's still a little bit of a sense of wondering how we are supposed to become what it is that we're called to become. Mm-hmm. I think that it's like we're showing up, or we're trying to show up, but what does that look like? And one of the great gifts of your book is an opportunity to kind of invite people into ways of peeking into what that might look like. And I thought maybe one of the first things we could talk about is this polarization thing, because it seems to me that we're wanting to maybe not be polarized, but I am wondering if maybe that's one of the great tasks ahead of us, is to figure out a way to create connection, especially with the people that we're struggling to feel connected to. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the critiques that I've heard about the book and that I own up to is that there is sort of a regionalism to it, because I do write a lot about the Bay Area because I live here. And actually, importantly, part of my inspiration for the book was the 2008 recession happened right as I was kind of becoming a bona fide adult. So I was like in 2008, I was 28, and that was for me, I don't know when anyone else in the room is trying to become an adult, but I was like sort of starting to go like, okay, where am I going to live? Am I going to have babies? Like, how do I structure my life? How do I work, et cetera? And so all of that was happening right as, as we were hearing earlier, the emperor had no clothes, right? The bottom dropped out of the economic landscape, and it was like, okay, so I had a hunch the American dream was sort of BS, but now I really understand that all these people who looked like they had it made were actually sitting on top of all of this debt and were unhappy. And so, like, in all of that kind of remix, what is the opportunity to create a life that I really believe in, that it really is about the American dream? And in the midst of that, I had babies, which made it very difficult to travel. So in terms of reporting on this book, a lot of it is pretty regional. A lot of it has to do with like the coast, the Bay Area. I do write about co-working, which is kind of all over the country. But I think that, the sort of cutting edge of some of the new better off, as I call it, the cutting edge of creating these like meaningful lives based on, fulfillment and relationships as opposed to status and stuff, are in more quote-unquote progressive places for the most part. In some ways, that's not true in the sense, and I try to make this point really strongly in the book, that a lot of the most important facets of what I see as a new better off are actually done and have been done better by poorer people for a very long time. So you look at something like the cohesion in a neighborhood, and it's like white privileged people are so stupid about creating neighborhood relationships. It's as if it's a language they don't speak, because privilege has made us dumb about vulnerability and about, interconnectedness and all that stuff. So to some extent, it feels like there is kind of this progressive conservative divide in some of what I'm writing about. On the other hand, I think if you dig deeper, there are some things that probably like Trump voters in Kentucky do much better than we do in, Oakland and San Francisco around creating communities, around showing up for each other, et cetera. So I think there's a lot to learn across.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Different,
Yeah. I mean, I even think that the great critique of Middle Circle, which is the organization that helped sponsor tonight, is that we're a bit of a choir. We're the intention of creating Middle Circle community is there, but the ability to go and to actually interact with people that we wouldn't otherwise spend time with, I think that there's so much power to be found in those types of relationships. And I guess my challenge to myself and to be talking openly about this is to go and invite us to start trying to do that, where we're not just fostering relationships with people like us, but people who are going to challenge us and invite us to become more of who we are. And I think a big part of that is generational stuff. And I'm curious, how many people here are who were raised here in this city or the Bay Area? I mean, how many people present here? So we have a good. It's definitely less than half, maybe
Not
like
a lot, yeah.
And sometimes I also wonder if we go to the places that feel kind of connected or a part of us, and we were joking about what if we all just. I mean, I know a lot of us are from the Midwest or from the Northeast. What if we just all went back home and brought the love that we're getting together, just go bring it back?
Yeah.
You know.
Totally. No, that was when Trump won, one of my husband, who's from Milwaukee, and I grew up in Colorado Springs, and one of our first reactions was like, maybe we need to move to the Midwest. Like, maybe part of the problem is like, you know, all of these sort of progressive elite people moving to the coasts and sort of hunkering down, and now we have this like divided nation. And we both have family members and friends and people we love very much who totally disagree with us. And like, are we having those conversations? I mean, one of my most moving moments after the election was literally the morning after. My husband, who's one of 6, big Irish Catholic family from Milwaukee, got on the phone with his older brother, who he almost never speaks to, and just sobbed on the phone. And his brother is a conservative voter. Wow. And they had a conversation about like, how did this happen? And his brother Danny tried to help him understand, like, he did not actually vote for Trump, but most of his friends did, kind of why. And I think one of the untold stories of this election is those kinds of moments between family members. And, you know, we focus so much on the vitriol, because it makes great headlines. But I think there's a lot of really moving, healing stuff going on underneath that surface.
Sounds way better than my attempt. We brought Rumi, our dog, home for the holidays, and I brought Rumi to the family dinner, and my aunt was there, and I said, "Oh, this is Rumi, our dog. Oh, Rumi, what's that name about? Oh, it's this famous poet, the founder of Sufism." And she said, "Oh, that's all we need is another ism." And I was like, "Let's go get some Christmas punch." It's like, Sufism is mystic.
Thousands of years older than
mystic Islam,
any of us, yeah.
So another thing I want to talk about is also is related to that. I think that there are people who really want to attempt to engage with kind of the invitation for change, to become our best possible becoming. But some of that, I think, is very challenging. And when we don't get it or we're struggling, I feel like it can feel very shaming. Mm-hmm. And I thought that maybe we could talk a little bit about, for example, men who want to like help engage in the movement of shared power among men and women in families or the workplace. Mm-hmm. But perhaps we don't do that well sometimes and then feel really bad about it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've got tips for us, gents in the room, or you could talk about. I
love this guy. Don't you love this guy?
Or you could talk about experiences with John.
Yeah. Or like tip number 1. No, I don't have tips. But interestingly, the book, the one chapter specifically on sort of work-life balance, that's what like mainstream media calls it, is about men, right? It's about fatherhood. And that was like my covert feminist thing of being like, we are not going to have another conversation about women and family and work, because until men own that part of the problem, like, things are never going to change. And so I'm just going to make this whole chapter about men and how more men are struggling about their relationship to parenthood and work and what that means, which I do think is a real thing. I mean, it wasn't a trick. I think that's real, but it's a smaller percentage of men that I hope becomes much, much larger. And it's not that I want to like share the pathology of that, but I feel that by acknowledging that men are really struggling with this, it doesn't become a women's issue anymore. It becomes an everyone issue, that if you care about people, it's essentially a tension between caregiving and money earning. And so anyone who cares for anyone, which is all of us, or should be, if you're not caring for anyone, probably something is wrong. All of us are caring for someone, whether it's a parent, a friend, our own children, someone else's children, etc., and work, and paid work. And how do we work those things together? Like, the work world was created at a time when men were in the workforce and were presumed to work 9 to 5, and there was presumably a wife at home taking care of kids. And we all know, like, that doesn't work, and it actually doesn't work for men either. And the other argument I really try to make is that it's not about men, and I think this is like the larger point about men being allies, is it's not about men's sort of chivalrous, like, wanting to show up and be better husbands or fathers. It's about, like, you are missing out if you aren't part of caretaking. Mm-hmm. Like, caretaking is the stuff of the universe. Like, at the end of our lives,
Are we thinking about like how much we made? Are we thinking about the moments that we took care of, dying relatives or small children, or, that is like such deep, meaningful stuff. And if men are missing out on that, they're missing out on some of the most meaningful parts of life. So, and for me, that's like anything regarding gender is like, it's not about being good to women. It's about like, you are missing out if you don't get your full emotional range of experience. And if you don't get to, parent or be a caring son or whatever that shows up as.
Yeah. And it seems to me like that plays into systematic stuff that is maybe what folks like us need to start speaking up about, because that also would mean that the norms that have been put into the workplace historically also need to be shifted.
Totally.
So that there might be a vision for one, because it seems to me like the solution is not just to swap roles.
No.
It would be to find an integrated way of living where we can be engaged in the life of our families and also find a way to be part of the reason we do most of our work, which is to earn income so we can be with our families and such. So it seems to me like we're also wondering about like what work is going to look like in the midst of what I think is going to be dramatic change over the next, like in our lifetime, the way we work is going to be really different.
Huge. Yeah, absolutely huge. And that's when, in that Father chapter, I say like, if leadership, and this, leans into this whole lean in, Sheryl Sandberg sort of paradigm of women's leadership. If like leadership means that you have to basically like neglect either people that you would like to take care of or your own sort of like personal health, it's not a great definition of leadership for men or women, right? It doesn't matter if it's about, Sheryl Sandberg telling you to lean in, or it's men like never getting to see their kids. Like either way, I don't actually think that makes for great leadership. And so what does that mean about just how we frame leadership, what we expect from leaders, and that kind of thing?
And then that's great. And let's talk a little bit about home life too, because I know that some people here have always talked about like, oh, let's go create a village, where we can all just live together and farm and live off the land, and I think there's a lot of excitement around the co-housing lifestyle, but some of us aren't quite sure how we would make that have that work for us here. Mm-hmm. And you live that way.
I live on the farm. Not really. I live in Temescal, Oakland. So I don't live on the farm at all, but I live on the farm, which is I live in a co-housing community.
Tell us about that for a sec.
So it's called Temescal Commons, and it's right at 42nd and Telegraph, where like Arbor Cafe is, if anyone has hung out there. And it's basically about around 25 people. We each have our own individual homes that are sort of built around a courtyard, and we also have an industrial-sized eating area and cooking area, shared garden, shared bike shed, tool shed, exercise room. And we eat together Thursday nights and Sunday nights, and we work on the land together one Saturday a month. And so that's kind of the logistical, and we're intergenerational. So it's like my daughter Stella, who's 9 months old, is the youngest. Louise, who's 78 years old, is the oldest, everything in between.
You have your own place, though.
Yes, which has everything a normal home would have, although we share laundry, which I'm lived in New York before this. I'm like, of course we share laundry, but to some people that seems like a loss.
I was here first.
Yeah. Yeah, that's logistically how it works. And then sort of from a more spiritual level, it was founded actually by a Christian church community 15 years ago who wanted to sort of live in a more daily way what they were thinking about on Sundays. And it's since gravitated to be interfaith. And I don't identify as Christian. But the founding principle of the whole thing remains, which was radical hospitality. That was the idea. And not the Holiday Inn version or whatever, but the version of like, anyone who walks through these doors, like we will feed them, and we have this sense of being part of this neighborhood and really caring about the land, and it's such a beautiful, it's just an incredible community. I
know.
Totally lucked out.
Is there any vacancies?
No,
available?
never.
Okay.
No one. Once you live this way, it's very hard to imagine not living this way, actually.
And there's some studies that show that way of living helps to increase quality of life and longevity of life. And it's interesting to think about perhaps creating models where we try to bring back the neighborhood again. I'm just really fascinated about that. So we're going to open up time to make sure that there's opportunity for a few questions from the folks who have gathered. So if you've got one that you really think is a good one, and this is a caveat that it's not the time to tell us about, it's for questions, basically. If you all know what I'm talking about, ask a question. And while you think about that, I think I'll ask you one more, which is that you've been kind of thought of by some folks who have shared some beautiful things about your work as someone who's trying to really be a voice for the good life that we can live into. And so just tell us really quick, what is that life? What is that life that we can live into when we think about what we're becoming? And yeah, we have heard this message that, well, your lives are not going to be as good as former generations. You won't be earning as much income collectively as the generations before you. And but I'm hearing from you, it's like, no, we're going to live a good life. So tell us about that life.
The silver lining of the bottom dropping out of the economy is basically that, like, it forces us to reckon with what we think a meaningful life is. And I don't have any prescription. Like, I think every person has their own notion of what the good life is and has to live into that. But I do know for sure that it's about relationships and meaning. You know, that fulfilling work, meaningful work, as opposed to just financially lucrative work, right? Like, everybody needs a modicum of income in order to, like, make their lives work. But beyond that, decisions you make should not always be based on the more money I can make, the better, which is essentially what the American dream historically has told us, that the more money you can make, the better, unequivocally, right? So meaning and fulfillment, and then this piece about relationships, just like being able to spend time with, whether it's family, friends, collaborators at work that you actually really care about, and being able to honor your own vulnerability by having these, like, interdependent relationships, whether that's in how you work, how you live, and, you know, there's a chapter on attention, so I think a lot about how you are when you are with the people you're with, putting your cell phone away, you know, some of those things that are very new to this generation in terms of trying to wrestle with what the good life is. That's something that, you know, our parents to some extent have wrestled with. Our grandparents definitely didn't have the same kind of struggles with. So I think that's all kind of in the mix. And it's showing up to places like this. It's being a part of Middle Circle. It's, you know, there's a couple of chapters on just making sure you have sort of communities of accountability, people that you feel like you can come together with and keep track of, you know, are you living a values-aligned life?
Love it. All right, we'll take a couple questions. We have a couple burning ones up there. I see a hand here. Yes.
So you talk about, you said that your book was criticized because it's regional, which is a common criticism that people in most of the country have. So I think the question that I have for you is, have you thought about or considered methods for understanding the people, the conservative movement, and why people didn't think the way that you do, perhaps? I don't know if you're a left-leaning, latte-sipping liberal, but...
I'm an IPA drinking, Oakland co-housing living.
Sure. So, but I think, but the question I think I have, and I have it for many people in this part of the country, is have you thought about ways of understanding the way the rest of the country thinks? Because the criticism, I think, is fair. You know, it's like, well, guess what? The rest of the country doesn't think like or live in the overpriced San Francisco Bay Area. So,
Right.
Great question. Great question.
Methods of bridging that gap.
We'll have her answer it. So,
Yeah,
Courtney.
so is that Mojo? Is that your name? Yeah, you were awesome in the improv. Way to go, man. I am from Colorado Springs. I mentioned that, which is kind of the home of evangelical Christianity and, a pretty conservative state, et cetera. So it actually doesn't feel that foreign to me. It's not like I was, born and raised in the Bay Area. So in that sense, I have people I love, my cousin, other people who are likely Trump voters, one-issue voters, pro-life, et cetera. So I have like a very personal connection to some of that, but I actually think, when your question strikes me from my sort of journalistic lens, which is we need to support journalism coming out of those places regionally, and it needs to be done by people from those communities. Because one of the things that, I mean, the first level of failure on media's part is to not report on what, you know, folks in the quote-unquote heartland are thinking and feeling and experiencing. But the next level is to cover it in an objectifying way, right? At which I see so much of is like, let's go to Kentucky and like talk to a poor white person and then write the story about like, this is what all poor white people think.
Which is condescending.
Right, it's totally condescending. And so I actually should not be the person to go to Kentucky, right? Like, I really think we need to build up the media ecosystem in these regions so that these stories are told from an authentic place by both people who are living them, but also people who just understand the context in a very lived way.
That's beautiful. I think that empathy is a tool that we haven't used super well, and that sometimes our output is shame, and we end up kind of wanting to shame change into each other, and I think that's not useful, and I think that appreciating people in their perspective and understanding that it's a lived experience and deeply grounded and valuable to them is a way to fall in love with someone, and I think that we need to do a lot more of that. Okay, we'll take two more. Let's make them brief questions so that we can make sure we have a chance to answer them. So, in the very back.
I would like to know about your struggles right now as a feminist, and also if you have like a way to kind of like self-care or healing that you can share as a feminist too.
What are your struggles, and how are ways that you're taking care of yourself and doing self-care?
Right to the gut, lady. I have a 9-month-old and a 3.5-year-old. So my self-care struggles are deeply about just being a working mom who's like trying to figure it out. My parents, as I mentioned, are here, and they've been helping because they're visiting, but it's like, and you know, I live in this co-housing community, so I have best case scenario in terms of like sort of a network of loving people, and it's still so hard. You know, it's so hard to figure out how to be a mom and do work I care about and the balance of all of those things. So I just feel like I'm constantly sort of operating at this level where there's no margin for error, which I think is like an experience of motherhood that so many people have, of just like, you have to be so on your game all the time, which is very hard. So on that level, probably not doing a great job of self-care, but having my parents, having people around me, having a network of support is the best thing I can do. My struggles from a feminist perspective, I mean, part of it is the personal and political thing of like, how do I create a life and a balance with my partner who's also a feminist, but like we both were raised in a sexist world where we fall into certain role stereotypes, and like, how do we keep mixing that up? On the larger political level, I feel like there's this like deep, immediate need for us to keep creating this intersectional feminist movement that was sort of, has been around, but like was really fomented by Trump's election and the Women's March and sort of this, you know, new broad interest in showing up in a way that like we haven't had for decades. So I want to be part of that, and I want to be part of really putting people's voices and people's stories and people in leadership, back to our leadership conversation, who haven't been there before. You know, one of the things we figured out at Feministing, which was really awesome, was that it was not awesome, was that the TV producers would always call like the white, kind of cisgendered, straight women on our staff to do the television interviews, like me. So finally we figured out, okay, we're just gonna pretend there's a hierarchy at Feministing. We'll tell them that Samita Mukhopadhyay is the executive editor, and then when they call, we'll be like, well, you surely want the president of Feministing, like the leader, Samita, and then she would do the interviews, because they were just like, oh yes, we want the leader, you know, even though that's not how we worked internally. So I'm like, one of my interests is like, what do we do to keep making that happen, to keep thinking about shared power and voice at this moment?
Well, okay, one last question.
First of all, thank you for being a public school teacher.
To all the teachers in the house.
Such an important and under-recognized job. So for 14.7% of Americans who live below the poverty line, there's no question that they need more money, right? It's like, that's not part of the conversation really. But my deep belief is that if privileged people questioned the way they think about and value money, it would change the whole country. I feel like there's sort of a romanticization around money that if that delusion was stripped down, it would mean that privileged people would be more just. Privileged people would realize that the discomfort around having less money was actually more meaningful than having the money and feeling secure. That like their sense of being aligned with their values and giving up some of their privilege would feel better if they were stripped of those delusions. So I actually don't think the two things are disconnected. I recognize that deciding whether to like take the CEO job or the CFO job because one might be better for your quality of life is a very privileged conversation. But the truth is that there is a link between that and the kids you're teaching, because I think it's a whole culture of romanticizing money and making people feel like the only way they're going to be secure is to stockpile money, when in fact the only way people are going to be secure is if they make meaningful relationships, and that's what I deeply believe. So yes, people need money at a base, and we live in a horrifically unequal society where like that has to change point blank. But beyond that, I think, and the book is not for your students, right? The book is really to wake up privileged people, and especially white people, about our role in thinking that money equals security, and that the more we have of it, the better off we are and the better off everyone is, which I believe is wrong, if that makes sense, yeah.
Let's thank Courtney. One of the things that Courtney wrote about in her book was a lot about ritual and finding new ways to engage in ritual. And I was going to invite us to engage in the ritual of sharing a pledge together. And this is an invitation, so you can choose to participate as you'd like. This comes from the Lead with Love campaign, and you can also find this on the website leadwithlove.vision. But it's a pledge for us to live out love in action. Grounded in love. We will dare to be powerful. We will use our strength in the service of our vision. I will ground myself in my actions in bold vision and fierce love. I will name and affirm our shared vision of the world. I will ask myself and my community to live our best values. I will cultivate our capacity for bold, loving action to daily restoration. I will move boldly forward. I will gather in community for deeply listening and mutual support. I will center leadership of targeted people. I will protect and care for people and communities targeted by hateful acts and policies. I will publicly demonstrate my resistance to actions and policies that normalize hate. I will create opportunities to declare and spread our shared commitment. We'll finish with this. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there's another truth. You are not alone. We're going to end our night in song, so I invite you to stay standing, and this is a sing-along.
When I wake up in the morning, love, the sun it hurts my eyes, and something without warning, love, carry on my life. Then I look at you, and I know it's alright. Then
All right, let's say thanks to the Jogo Performance Center for hosting us, especially to Alex up there doing sound. We want to say thank you to everyone from Middle Circle who volunteered tonight, last night, and tonight. Thanks to all of our local leaders who lead circles. Stick around, and thanks for coming. Have a great night.